Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're diving right into a fascinating collision between Web3 and real-world law, specifically looking at the QGov blockchain. For years, the crypto space has run on this almost mythological idea that we could literally replace the messy, highly subjective world of human laws with the cold, hard logic of math. Well, today we're looking at the actual architecture, trying to bridge that massive gap between deterministic code and our highly unpredictable real world. Let's get into it. So, can code actually be law? It's a huge question, right? One that's haunted the decentralized space for years. Back in the early DeFi days, people really thought smart contracts were absolute. Like if the protocol's code says a transaction is valid, boom, it's final. No takebacks. But as the ecosystem grew up, and we started dealing with tokenized real-world assets and super complex financial instruments, the limits of that code as law mindset, they became impossible to ignore. Historically, there was this incredible promise. The idea was that smart contracts could perfectly translate a contract into safe-to-execute code, completely bypassing domestic, supranational, and international legal systems. It was this beautiful, utopian vision of self-regulation, an order without law, where everything is just self-executing rules. But reality, as we all know, is a whole lot messier. Time and time again in permissionless networks, we've seen that when exploits happen or when we try to interact with physical things like real estate or equity, the total lack of real-world legal enforcement just leaves victims completely stranded. On-chain interactions are mostly pseudonymous. If a smart contract gets drained, victims don't have what lawyers call clinical finality, which is basically just definitive, legally binding closure. You see, a traditional contract is a highly specific concept tied to a jurisdiction. A smart contract, it's just software, and software can't walk into a civil court and enforce a property right. This matters massively for you, because without that legal bridge, your digital assets are fundamentally vulnerable. Enter QGov. This is an EVM-compatible Layer 1 blockchain built specifically to act as an external security anchor for DAOs, DeFi, and the broader Web3 ecosystem. They use a really interesting concept called shared governance security. Think about how decentralized apps rely on their underlying networks for transaction security, right? Well, here, they can opt into Q's infrastructure for governance security. It runs on a brilliantly simple economic principle. The cost of corrupting the governance must absolutely always be drastically higher than any potential reward you could get from doing it. You can really think of QGov like a digital nation-state. Instead of just relying on wild, permissionless code, the whole thing operates on a foundational document, the QGov Constitution. This lays down transparent, predictable rules for everybody involved. It bridges that gap between trustless execution and reliable human agreements by providing a private law-based framework. So no arbitrary rule changes, no centralized dictators. Every single action is governed by legally binding set of principles. To actually make this constitution work, QGov relies on a trinity of governance. Listen, for any decentralized system to actually survive and function long-term, you absolutely need these three elements fully integrated. You need clear rules, a solid mechanism to enforce them, and a reliable way to resolve the disputes that are definitely going to happen. If you're missing even one of these, the system is eventually going to collapse under the pressure. So how is this constitution actually enforced on the network? Well, it happens through a highly structured, super scalable, delegated proof-of-stake consensus mechanism, or DPOS. Token holders vote for a specific group of network nodes that reach consensus on the state of the network. And since your voting weight is proportional to the stake you hold, the network gets incredibly high transaction throughput and predictable costs, all while staying deeply decentralized. This mechanism builds an honestly brilliant system of checks and balances right into the DNA of the network. On one side, you have the validators. These are the doers. They validate transactions, form the blocks, keep the ledger ticking. But then, acting as this supplementary governance layer, you have the root nodes. Now, they don't actually modify the blockchain. Instead, they act like judicial watchdogs. They are constantly monitoring the validators to make absolutely sure they never, ever violate the Q constitution. Of course, to participate in this digital government, you need the native QGOV token. It's the economic engine of the whole shebang. Validators and root nodes actually have to stake QGOV tokens in dedicated smart contracts to prove they're committed to keeping the network legit. Meanwhile, everyday token holders can use QGOV to pay gas fees, vote on protocol parameters, or even delegate their tokens to validators to earn a slice of the rewards. It keeps everyone actively involved in securing the network. But here's a detail that might surprise you. When digital disputes actually happen on QGov, they don't just run a quick digital poll to figure it out.
They anchor their resolution in the real world by actually using the rules of the International Chamber of Commerce's arbitration court. QGov creates a legally sound way to resolve DeFi disputes and enforce the outcomes privately and efficiently. It completely bypasses the crazy backlogs of traditional nation-state courts. How wild is that?
Which brings us to the actual physical anchor for this entire digital ecosystem, the European Principality of Liechtenstein. Q Development AG operates right out of Vaduz, deliberately leveraging what is arguably one of the most advanced regulatory frameworks on the planet. I'm talking about the Token and Trustworthy Technology Service Provider Act, usually just called the TVTG or the Liechtenstein Blockchain Act. Okay, let's unpack this a bit, because this is where the magic really happens. The TVTG introduces something called the token container model. Under this civil law framework, a token isn't just lines of code, it's legally recognized as a container. And that container can hold property ownership, company equity, or contractual claims. So when you transfer that token on the blockchain, in the eyes of the law, you have legally transferred the underlying right. It's a total game changer. A recent UK Justice report on digital assets hit the nail on the head regarding this. They pointed out that when you're dealing with real-world digital assets, it is absolutely critical to know how proprietary interests become enforceable against third parties. You can't just send a token from wallet A to wallet B and pretend a legal transfer happened if real-world law doesn't care. QGov, backed by that Liechtenstein law, provides the exact legal synchronization you need to make those transfers hold up in an actual court. Through some very specific legal mechanisms in Liechtenstein, specifically Section 81A of their civil code, QGov essentially allows you to create purely digital bearer assets. This means the digital instrument, sometimes called an uncertificated security, carries the exact same public faith as a physical paper certificate. It provides that true clinical finality we talked about earlier. It allows DAOs and big institutions to manage real value on-chain without constantly sweating over legal ambiguity. And to make sure nobody is just faking these assets out of thin air, Liechtenstein law requires a completely unique role called the physical validator. This isn't just a piece of software, it's a heavily regulated, licensed entity with strict capital requirements. We're talking up to 250,000 Swiss francs. Their job? Making sure the digital token perfectly matches the real-world physical object. So if an oil painting is tokenized, the physical validator guarantees that painting is real, it's locked in a vault somewhere, and the legal rights of the token holder are actually enforced. What's truly revolutionary about all of this is seeing modern legal frameworks finally step up and formally recognize that cryptographic control literally equals legal possession. When you hold the private key to a QGov token, the law presumes you are the legal owner of the right inside that token container. The law is finally catching up to the tech, taking your exclusive control of a private key and translating it into a recognized physical priority of interest. Which leaves us with a pretty massive final thought to chew on today. We've seen that code alone just can't replace the messy nuance of human law, but at the same time, traditional law is way too slow for the speed of the blockchain. So, as we push for mainstream institutional adoption of tokenized assets, is a constitutional, legally enforceable digital ledger, anchored by models like QGov and forward-thinking laws like Liechtenstein's, the exact missing link we've been searching for to finally fuse the digital and physical worlds? Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep exploring.